Other update later. Right now, we're going to learn Torah. Oh, I know. Other update later. Right now, we're going to learn Torah. Oh. And we're live. Okay, I'm just going to share this on a couple of platforms, and then we're going to get busy. We have a lot to learn. Two more shares and we will be good to go. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Caleb Gittel. Good evening to all the wonderful people on Facebook, on Zoom, on YouTube. What a crowd on Zoom tonight. Beautiful. It's good to be back in the saddle. It was wonderful. We had a wonderful, I know you're going to ask, so I'll preempt it and tell you that we had a wonderful trip to Greater Chicago. Despite what you hear in the media and you think you're going to get shot in every corner, it's a very big city and a wonderful place. And a lot of fun things to do with kids. And Lake Michigan is absolutely magnificent. Now that I got that out of the system, we are in Parshas Pekudei. We are in the last Torah portion before, in the last Torah portion of Pekudei. We are 2 weeks and 2 days away from, well, 2 weeks and 3 days away from Passover. So if you didn't sign up for the Seder, you should. So the Chavi has an idea of how many people to cook for. That's another commercial message. And then we're going to open our Chumash. Let me just find the right spot here. It's chapter 39, verse 29. So in the life Chumash that we use, it's page 581. Here we go. We're going to cover a lot of ground tonight. Some of it may sound a little familiar. Most of it will be novel understanding from the Jewish mystics, from the Kabbalists, and as elucidated by the teachings of the Rebbe, how it's slightly connected to the coming of Mashiach. We're going to cover a lot of different, all on the same topic, but a lot of different perspective. It's very fascinating, ranging from the 12th century and Maimonides and his counter-arguer, who argued with a lot of what he said, the Ravid of Rav Ben David, as well as Rabbeinu Bechaye, and many others. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight. At least I will. I hope you do too. So let's read on page 581. Again, it's chapter 39, verse 29. It says, the professionally embroidered sash of fine linen twisted with turquoise, purple, and crimson wool, as God has commanded Moses. So one of the clothing that the priests would wear in the temple, and the Mishkan, the tabernacle for that matter, was a sash. You know, by davening, if you've ever davened in our shul, you know that I wear a gartel. It's not made out of linen and turquoise wool, but it's a sash that separates the upper body and the lower body during davening. That's why Hasidim wear a gartel during prayer, as a physical reminder to focus on the upper body, on the heart, the emotions, and the brain, the intellect during our prayers, and not get caught up in the human temptation that generally is from the waist and below. But that idea of wearing a gartel, even though it's a Hasidic custom, it didn't start with Hasidim, even though I'd love to take credit. It goes all the way back to the temple, the tabernacle. The priests had a avnet, a belt, or what we'd rather call a sash. Why do I make that distinction? Because a belt generally is there to help keep your pants up. except the pants that the priest would wear were prepared in a way where it tightened itself around the waist of the Kohen. So he did not need actual suspenders or belts to keep his hose and to keep his pants on. So then he wore the belt for a different purpose. What was the purpose? The sash, to separate the upper and the lower body. Now, when you read this verse, anyone that studies Torah, and I always like doing this, even though it's not really fair, and it's not the fairest thing to do. But when you read just verse 29, you're like, oh my gosh, we got a big problem in this verse. What's the problem in verse 29? Oh, God bless Rabbi Gordon. So the sash was made of linen and wool. There's a biblical prohibition. Very good, Seth Baruch. It's called Shatnez. The mixture of wool and linen is biblically prohibited. It's both in the book of Leviticus. It's also mentioned in Deuteronomy. So it's mentioned in Vayikra and it's mentioned in Devarim that we don't mix wool and linen. And it's part of a set of laws that are divided into various sections. And they have a lot of similarities, but they do not have all the same rules. So there's the prohibition against mixing kilayim of seeds of Zroyim, mixing seeds that are not part of the same seed family, and planting them together to create a third type of a hybrid. Like I once saw here in Albertsons years ago, they had a tomato hybrid with some mudna, weird concoction they made over there. Broccolini. Well, broccolini. No, the tomato, they had a name for it. Anyhow, they mix various species together and they create a third creature. So one of them is with seeds. Another one of them is when you plow your field and you use two animals to hold the plowing vessels together. And you use an ox and a donkey, for example, in the same process, and they don't belong with each other. And when they do come together, they end up creating a third type of creature, a third type of animal that's not either one or the other, right? What is it? Where does the mule come from?
Oh, donkey.
Donkey and something, a donkey and a horse, I don't know. So you have these hybrid animals that God perhaps did not create on his own when he created the world. Then humans came along and took animals together and brought them together, prohibited by Torah, and created these third type of creatures. Then you have the prohibition of shatnez in clothing. And that is the prohibition of wool and linen. And the prohibition really is that it's prohibited to wear any garments that have the mixture of wool and linen happened at the stage of combing, spinning, or weaving in the process of production. Even if threads were used to sew a button onto a wool suit, and the threads used are made from linen, and now they're sewn together, it is prohibited by the Torah. Even if you use it only in the shoulder pads, which, by the way, funny enough, the collar and the shoulder pads, are almost the number one place where you find shatnez, where you find those mixtures. It's prohibited. We have here in Bozeman, Baruch Hashem, we have Amram, who is a boidik shatnez, who checks for shatnez. So if anyone buys a new suit or has an old suit that was never checked and they want to check it for shatnez, you bring it to Amram and he has a special microscope and he knows that he's been trained in this to know how to differentiate the various fibers and to know what's what, so to know if it has shatnez or not. Why? It's a very nice law, and it's important that even if you buy a suit that is 100% wool, you still have to get it checked, because in case you didn't know, just like with food in America, with clothing, there could be 2% of product in any suit that they do not have to report whatsoever. And they definitely are not going to include what's included in the shoulder pads and the collar. They only include what's in the external part of the garment, not in the internal part of the garment. But why? You have an answer as to why?
What, the wool linen?
Yeah.
Because it was altars before?
That's what the Rambam says. Maimonides says. That becomes tricky. It becomes tricky if you say it's because the idolaters wore it, because idolaters wore a lot of things. And it's true, there are things in Judaism we don't do because the idolaters did it, including tattooing and other things. But Maimonides is the one who always tries to find the logic, and he says it's because of the idolaters. The truth is that most of the commentaries accept that the laws of Shatnez are considered part of the mitzvahs that are chukim, that we have no logic for at all. We do it because God said so, which is important in itself. Oh, we're going to get to that. That's going to be the purpose of today's class, why the priests are allowed to do it in the temple. There's a very, very interesting mystical teaching for Rabbeinu Bechaya. There's two Rabbeinu Bachyas. And I think it's important for people that, came to class, learn Torah. Rabbeinu Bechaya, or Rabbeinu Bachya, there's two of them. There were two rabbis that were named Rabbeinu Bachya. One of them's name was Rabbeinu Bachya ben Asher ibn Pekuda. One of them's name was Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pekuda. He was the guy in the 11th century who authored the book Chayvas HaLevov, Duties of the Heart, which includes Gates of Trust, Shar B'Tachon. Credible Jewish philosopher, thinker, writer. That's not who I'm quoting today. A lot of people don't realize there was two of them with the same, they're known by the same name, Rabbeinu Bachya. The one I'm quoting today is Rabbeinu Bachya ben Asher Chaliwa, and he was in the 13th century, so later than the first Rabbeinu Bachya, almost 300 years later, and he wrote a book of commentary on the Torah. And when it comes to the laws of Shatnez, what Rabbeinu Bachya says is that there's a spiritual, mystical significance for why we keep wool and linen separate. And I want to clarify, this is a biblical halacha. This is not, when you hear so-called, quote-unquote, enlightened Jews who say, we only follow biblical law. Okay, so that means your wife uses the mikveh. That means you don't wear Shatnez clothing. That means you only eat kosher food. You never mix milk and meat. You fast on Yom Kippur. You keep 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. I can give you the list of all the biblical laws, which obviously is not what they mean. What they mean is, no, I told you the general rule. I said this at the JLI class. Anyone that says they only follow the written law and they don't believe in the oral law, it means they don't believe in any law. And I stand by that. There's a biblical halacha. There's a biblical mitzvah about Shatnez. And by the way, it doesn't only apply to your clothing that you wear as garments. It applies to curtains in your home. It applies to tablecloths in your home. Now, in most cases, tablecloths and curtains and towels are not made of mixtures of wool and linen. But should there be such an option, it would be prohibited, and it's biblically prohibited. I've shared this story before in writing. I don't know if I've ever said it in class. There used to be a store in Borough Park, in the massive Orthodox Jewish community of Borough Park in Brooklyn. It was called The Right Place. Fascinating concept. It was run by a group of probably 30 or 40 Orthodox Jewish men who spent the entire day learning Torah in a kollel, in a study hall. And at 5 p.m., they would go home to eat dinner. And at 6 o'clock or so, they would open up this warehouse. And it was only open from like 6 to 11 at night. And it was a suit warehouse where they sold suits. So they worked at night to earn a living, and during the day they studied Torah. And the suits were pretty fairly priced. They were not Saks Fifth Avenue suits. They were suits for Orthodox Jews that wear suits a lot, every Shabbos, every Yom Tov, not once every 3 years for a wedding. So we were once there buying a suit. My mother was with us, my mother of blessed memory, and we got to the counter at the checkout, and there was this looked like a big rabbi with a big beard and big payas, black hat. And my mother said, do you guys have a service we can get the suit checked for Shatnez? And the guy said, this company doesn't need to be checked for Shatnez. My mother's Brooklyn,
Mine kicked in.
her Brooklyn experience kicked in. She didn't scream because that wasn't her style, but with a very firm voice said, you're a big rabbi, you don't know that Shatnez is the Iraisa, that it's a biblical prohibition? The Iraisa means biblical. What do you mean it's good? Who said it was good? Who checked it? The company? Some Gentile in Italy who's trying to sell you a suit told you it has no Shatnez? What, he said only you trust them? It remained etched in my memory till today because he was obviously a little, let's just say, in the rules of shaming people, my mother did not excel in that moment. But she could not believe that a guy who claimed to be a rabbi, or looked like one at least, would ever say such a thing about a biblical commandment. So we take Shatnez very, very seriously. So obviously it's a good step to first of all check, make sure it's not clearly wool and linen. If it's clearly in the tag, it says clearly wool and linen, then you definitely stay away from it. Don't even bother. But even if it doesn't, get it checked. You go to Macy's. There's only one place to buy suits in Montana. It's a Macy's. So you go to Macy's, you buy a suit, you call Amram, say, can I drop it off? In 48 hours, you'll have it back. You won't even know that he checked it. And Baruch Hashem, you'll know that you're not wearing Shatnez. So Rabbeinu Bachya says as follows. He says, sure, you could say that it's because of the idolaters, or you could say it's God's command, but actually there is logic, mystical logic behind this prohibition of mixing wool and linen. What is, I'm going to get to you in a minute, Manny, thank you. What is the explanation? So Rabbeinu Bachya gives us two layers of understanding of how it relates to mysticism. The first one's pretty harsh, in my opinion. This is my opinion, from reading it, from studying it. He says, if you look at the story of Cain and Abel, Cain brought an offering of flax, and Abel brought a sheep, a lamb. The lamb has wool. Cain brought flax, which is linen. That's where linen comes from. So we right there and then see biblically that there's an issue with the combination of these two. And what Rabbeinu Bachya says is that the way God created the world, every single item in this world has energetics. It has a divine spark. It has an energy connected to higher powers on high. Some of those energies cannot be combined because when they combine, they become combustible. They're not healthy for the person wearing them, for the world in which they are being worn. Cain and Abel, the reason why Cain ended up in exile and Abel ended up dead because his brother killed him was because the energetics of the flax and the wool did not belong together. They couldn't handle each other's energy. And what ends up happening is that it turns that you end up having an energy of negativity and an energy of positivity, and they don't work together. It's like when you do the cables in the car, you better make sure the red is on red and black is on black, the positive and negative, or you're going to be in trouble. How do I know that? I watched Chavi's uncle once from Canada putting in cables, and he put the wrong one on, and I watched not a big explosion, but a little explosion take place, and someone's car was pretty messed over for a while. You don't mix the energies. The energies don't work with each other. But the first understanding of Rabbeinu Bachya is that it's negative energy and positive energy, and they can't work together. What's your question, man? Oh, we're going to talk about food in a second. I'm so glad you brought that up. The second interpretation of Rabbeinu Bachya is more relatable, and it really helps us understand the variety of Jewish laws. He says there's just supreme divine energies, both good energies, but they are too powerful to reside simultaneously with the other supreme divine energy. And when they come together, it's just too much for the world to handle, at least until Mashiach comes, because they don't complement each other. They actually destroy each other. Sometimes you say, wow, it's great to have different attributes, complement each other, like a healthy marriage. Each one complements the other. But when they're just too strong in their revelation or in their energy or in their personality, although attributes don't have personalities, then they don't end up complementing each other. They end up going to war and end up either in divorce or murder. Wool is white. White, according to the mystics, according to Kabbalah, represents chesed, kindness, the attribute of good. White is a image of purity for sure. And Yom Kippur, we know that from red to white. Red is sinfulness and white is, but it represents kindness. The wool represents kindness. Linen, flax, for whatever reason, mystically represents gevura, severity. You put those two and they're both needed, by the way. The world needs both. The question is if we can handle both together. And the answer is that we cannot. Rabbeinu Bachya says that the issue of combining wool and linen mystically is that we need to understand that God created barriers. And no one likes to hear this, but that's my job. To say the truth, whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, I prefer no barriers either. At least sometimes. I think all of us in some parts of our life prefer no barriers, no rules, no regulation. Normal, healthy people like some type of structure, some type of discipline. except all of us like certain things without discipline and without structure, and we tend to choose different times or different activities in which we prefer not having barriers. I never heard husbands and wives complain. I never heard a wife complain that she wants to join her husband on the golf course with his buddies. Somehow the buddies end up with each other. I never heard a woman complain that she wants to join her friends, her husband and his friends at a bar. The women want to go to women's stuff. Whether it's to the gym, to a book club, to hike, whatever women do, there's differentiation. But when it comes to shul, suddenly they can't resist each other. They haven't seen each other in 3 months because the husband's away on business. But to go to shul, how could I sit in a synagogue where I'm not sitting next to my spouse? How is that even possible? How could I pray without my spouse next to me? Allah cup. You could pray next to you without your wife, just like you did the other 90 things in your life without her. And she could do that without you because she did another 100 things without you. So it's an excuse. It's an excuse to break a barrier when it seems slightly inconvenient. But somehow we have no problem creating barriers when it's perfectly convenient for us. And what the Torah is teaching us with this teaching from Rabbeinu Bachya, amongst others, is that there's something extremely valuable in healthy barriers. Because we recognize that every part of creation was created by a creator, by a God who knows the world because he created it. He is one with it all, so he knows it. He is it. And when he creates a structure for it, we are doing ourselves the greatest favor by following through on it. So when we come along and say, well, I don't care about wool and linen. Well, I understand that. I understand why it seems foolish from a logical perspective. But when I start giving you the energy behind it, like, hold on, do you really want to bring two forces, two supreme forces of chesed and gevurah, of kindness and severity, and have this combustible activity going on in your life? And what are the consequences of that? Many brought up something very important before about food. And the truth is, it's very much connected. Same reason why we don't put an ox and a donkey together. They represent, an ox represents gevurah, severity, a donkey represents chesed. You don't put them together. By the way, the same applies, even though it has nothing to do with Shatnez, to mixing milk and meat. Generally, the laws of kosher, right? Generally, the laws of kosher are illogical, meaning they're super rational. God told us to do it and we do it. But if you're looking for a mystical reason for why we would never mix milk and meat, the answer is milk is white like wool. It represents chesed. Meat is hard. It's hard to digest it. It's red. It's tough. Unless you keep it in the oven for 9 days, it represents severity. You don't mix milk and meat. You don't mix milk and meat because God said not to mix them. But the idea that there is no reason for it, there is. You may not like the reason because it's mystical, but if you're a spiritual person, if you're slightly more sensitive to the spirit, to the soul, then you start recognizing, right? Today, by the way, everyone into energy healing. And it's true, there is such a thing called energy healing. But it's not new to the world. We're Jews. We've always thought about what's beneath the surface, what's going on in the realm of energy and energetics. And this is a basic, profound centerpiece of Jewish mysticism, that every single part of creation has a connection to a particular attribute. And if you bring them together when they cannot be with each other because they are not complementing each other, because they are too strong to complement each other. You ever hear these situations where a husband and wife say, and it is true, in some cases it's true, we're getting divorced, we have no animosity towards each other, we're just, the personalities just don't work. And sometimes what that means is that the personalities are both wonderful personalities, that just each of them is too strong to the other one. So sometimes, like Javi and I have a very strong personality, we both have very strong personalities, but somehow we figured out a way that for most of the time, we manage to complement each other. Most of the time, it complements each other. But it's borderline. You just go a little bit stronger or a little bit more tough, and it's combustible, it's going to explode. And that's the point here. Rabbeinu Bachya is teaching us that we need to be so careful about how we bring things together, because unity is what it's all about. We want to bring all of creation and have it all merged or submerged into the oneness of God and godliness, but it has to be done at the right time, at the right place, which is why, by the way, and it's not for today's class, but I will give you a little taste of it, just for the fun of it, that according to many teachings. Even though when Mashiach comes, the Torah will remain the same. The practicality of mixing wool and linen will not apply, just like the practicality of mixing milk and meat won't apply. Oh, why? Not because the rule changed, because the world changed. The godliness that will exist when Mashiach comes will be so powerful, so overarching, that Chesed and Gvura will be both minimized in the presence of the aura of God. And when they're minimized, they're able to work with each other because their arrogant self isn't on display. God is, and the example actually that the Rebbe gives in this 1990 talk was of, it's interesting, today, the whole week, everyone's been talking about the signal chat between, what's his name, the Secretary Hegseth and Vice President, this whole mixer with it, right? The business, they all work for the president, right? So the mashal, the example, the parable that the Rebbe brings in 1990 is, if you take each one of those secretaries on their own, their personalities will crush each other, because each one is trying to be more powerful. Each one of them is trying to be more relevant. But when you put them in a room with their boss, they all are sitting in front of the guy they work for, who can fire them at the flick of a finger, arois. And guess what happens when you're in front of the boss? You figure out a way to be nice to each other in front of the boss. So Mashiach comes, the divine light is going to be so incredible that it's going to have that effect. Now, there's layers and layers of fascinating conversation, because the Rambam, Maimonides, in the 12th century says in the last law, the laws of Kilayim, the laws of Shatnez, he says, and I quote, I brought it with me so I can quote straight from the Holy Book. He says, the Kohanim who wore the priestly garments, even when they were not in service, even in the temple, they get lashes, because they're wearing a sash that has Shatnez. The Rambam says unequivocally that a Kohen who has this garment called a sash made from wool and linen can only wear that sash when he's actually in service, doing the service. The minute the service is over, he must take it off. And if he doesn't take it off, he's liable to get lashes. The priests, they all wore an avnei, they all wore it, yeah. The Ravid, Rabbi Avram ben David, who interestingly was born after the Rambam, the Ravid was born in 1125, but he passed away in 1198. And the Rambam was born in 1138, so he was born a little bit after, but the Rambam passed away in 1204. So, actually, I'm sorry, so the Ravid was born a little bit before the Rambam, and the Rambam passed away after him in 1204. But they were contemporaries, and they argued. The Rambam was born in Cordova, Spain, and eventually passed away in Egypt, and he's buried in Tiberias in Israel. The Ravid was born in Provence in France, and he spent the majority of his life in France, and he debated the Rambam on certain. And by the way, anytime you buy a Rambam, you'll see on the bottom the Rambam's ruling and then the Ravid's argument. So he argues with the Rambam, and he says, no, you're wrong. In the temple, even after the service is done, the Kohen does not need to take off his sash. Why? What's the basis of their argument? So the Rebbe says something incredible. He says, listen to what Rabbeinu Bachya gave us two options. Rabbeinu Bachya said that the prohibition of wool and linen is either negative and positive, bad and good, or it's just two good attributes that are too powerful to be with each other. So he says, the Rambam, who says you got to take it off right away, understands it in the first he understands the whole prohibition based on the first interpretation, which means it's a negative thing. It's negative and positive. In the temple of God, when you're in service, it goes away. So the minute it's over, you take off the sash because the negativity will come back. But if it's about the service, but according to the Ravid, it's not negative and positive. It's two supreme attributes that are too strong for each other. But if you're in the temple of Hashem, that's not going to play out. And therefore you can wear the sash even after the service is done, even as long as you're in the temple, even correct, because that negativity isn't there, that experience isn't there in that moment.
So when they're done with the service, as long as they're in the temple.
In other words, you can understand it this way as well. if the Ravid understands it to be negative and positive, he's like, yeah, but you're in the temple of God. It wouldn't matter at all. The Rambam says it's not just about negative and positive. It could also be about the supreme attributes. And if it's about supreme attributes, and the minute the service is over, those supreme attributes become problematic again. Take it off. And again, it's all about boundaries. I'm allowed to wear it, but only during the service, but I'm not allowed to wear it the minute the service is over. This is tough stuff. But that's exactly the message God is imbuing to us. He is the one who creates boundaries. I don't care. And I'm going to say a radical statement. I don't care what sociologists say about what the boundaries are or aren't. That's not where I go to find out how the structure of creation and the world is supposed to look like. Humanity, the world, science, nature isn't defined for me by some yo-yo in a university. If what they come up with is in sync with the divine image, if it's in sync with the divine picture, by all means, I welcome any more additional layers of understanding of how God's creation plays out. But if it doesn't, I don't lose sleep over it. I don't care how many grants they got in the university to come up with some idea that's against Hashem. That doesn't matter to me. There's boundaries. God said there's a Kohen, there's a Levi, there's an Israelite. God said there's men and women. God said there's people that live in the land of Israel have one set of rules, and outside of Israel there's certain other rules. God said there's temple rules and there's outside temple rules. God said there's rules for a Kohen in the service and there's rules for a Kohen out of the service. God says Shatnez is not okay, but God also says when I tell you to make the Shatnez, it's perfectly fine. There is no negativity there because I told you to make it for the Kohanim. And therefore, even when they're not in service and they're wearing it, there's still no problem with it because I told you to make it. The only reason the Rambam says it's still problematic when you're not in service is because he sees it from a different spiritual perspective where it's two different attributes that are powerful. And therefore, he says, when you're not in service, take it off because it's just we can't handle it. But that goes back to answers another important question. And that is, I get why it's permitted to have the sash because God said so. But why did we need this whole headache? Couldn't God just tell you to make a sash out of wool? Why does he have to make both together? You have to make it complicated. You have to have the Rambam and the Ravid and the Radbaz and the Bachli. Everyone's arguing it. I understand it creates a lot of Jewish beautiful discussion. Pilpul, it's wonderful. It's like a Talmudic discussion. But why? Says the Rebbe, based on the Rambam, that the reason we wear the sash, whether it's in our prayers as Hasidim or the Kohen in the temple, is what did the sash do for the Kohen? Every other garment, every other garment that the Kohen wore had a purpose. The apron at the bottom had bells, right? Randy, they had bells that would ring when they would come into the temple. The tzitz on their head with the name of God would atone for certain sins. The breastplate would give them answers. It had the Urim V'Tumim and said everything had a reason except for the sash. What was the sash? There's no purpose other than the Rambam says to when they wrapped themselves in the sash, which by the way was 32 amma long. It was a very, very long, 32 amma, probably 40 plus feet long. It was a long sash they had to wrap around themselves. The 32 amma represents the lave, the heart. It was about prepping the heart in service of God. That's all it was, to put you in the separation of the upper body, lower body, to put you into a state of prayer. As the Hasidim say, "Shtelt sich davening." It's not the davening, it's situating myself in a prayerful mode. They were putting themselves in the mode. And it's in that moment that God said, I want you to have a sash made of wool and linen to remind you that the ultimate and perhaps the only way to bring true unity between various attributes, between different groups of people, is when we allow ourselves to be in the aura of God. We can never have diverse, healthy communities if it's not dictated and showered upon by the light of Hashem. You bring a bunch of people with different ideas together and it's not godly ideas and put them in a room and say, figure it all out, it's going to look like the Israeli Knesset. Right? That's what it looks like. They'll murder each other. Or like maybe the Turkish, they throw chairs at each other. The Romanian ones throw benches at each other. The Polish guys spit at each other. Well, why? Well, they can't. Everyone always says the same thing. Can't we just all get along? Of course we can't get along. He's a communist, he's a capitalist, he's a conservative, he's a super liberal. This one hates Jews, this one loves Jews. How do you want them to get along? And there's only one answer to that question. The only time they can get along is when the aura of God is in the conversation. When they are in the presence of God, like the cabinet members in the presence of their king or president, then there's an aura that's bigger than all of them that can bring them together. And that's why in the temple of God at work, that's why, by the way, in the mitzvah of tzitzis, when we wear tzitzis, you're allowed to mix wool and linen and tzitzis, because it's a mitzvah of God that reminds you of God all the time. And God says you can mix wool and linen. There's a juxtaposition of the verses and numbers between the mitzvah of making tzitzis and the prohibition against Shatnez. And from there, the Talmud teaches, the juxtaposition teaches us that you can have Shatnez and tzitzis, even though today most tzitzis do not have Shatnez in it anyhow. But I'm saying you're allowed to. Because when you're in the presence of God and you're following God's dictates, that's where there can be unity. Because there's a presence amongst you that is bigger than all of us. Bigger than the 2 or 3 or 9 or 50 factions of Jews. But don't be shocked when you see people hating on each other and vilifying each other and trying to destroy each other. Of course they are. It's not godly. Anyone that truly finds themselves and they prep themselves and they put their gartel on, they put their sash on, I am going into a state of godliness right now, a state of prayer right now. At that moment, there's room for disagreement. But only when a person's unhealthy and ungodly does disagreement turn into nasty divisiveness. And that applies individually, friendships, marriages, children, parents, but collectively as well. My friend today in New York told me, one of my closest friends, and I know I'm saying this and it's going to make Haggai a little nervous, but that's my job. I still got to say what I heard. My friend told me today that there's a Jewish guy in New York who's literally a pro-Hamas Jew. I know it sounds ironic. And my friend knows him, the Chabad rabbi. He says in the beginning, after October 7th, he didn't even want to talk to the guy. But eventually, he's a friend that he knows. So and the more he talked to him, the more he realized that even though they totally disagree with each other wholeheartedly, there's a guy there that Nebuch, unfortunately, did not get a proper Jewish education, and whatever he's been taught from the day he was born made him believe that the Jews are the problem. Yeah, I know. So what are you going to do with someone like that? Never going to talk to you again. That's really going to help. I'm sure it's going to change his mind. It's much harder to have the conversation with someone you totally disagree with. But ask yourself, what's your purpose? Is it about you and your ego? Or is it about hopefully penetrating that person with some truth, a kernel of truth along the way? It's about the kernel of truth. And it's about recognizing that if we allow God into the picture, what are you worried about? He's going to make you into a pro-Hamas person? He won't. And it's like me, am I worried that someday someone's going to make me hate Israel? Not even a drop. So I can talk to anyone. Same reason why I'll talk to a Christian. What am I scared? I'm going to turn Christian for 5 minutes of talking to them? The chances are not only slim, there's no zero. The importance of recognizing that there's no way to unite society unless we take into consideration the barriers, structures, light, and aura of God in that process. And when we put ourselves in that mode, we can have healthier conversations, healthier relationships, and a healthier world until we merit the era in which those divine attributes will shine in all its glory in a way that they can complement each other. The prohibition against seeds will never become permitted. The prohibitions against oxen and donkeys will never become permitted because those create third entities that are totally prohibited. But milk and meat doesn't create anything new. Shatnez doesn't create anything new. It's just two items that don't belong together. And that's a very big difference between those two. And that will be with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkeinu B'Dispim in our days. Many, what's your question? It doesn't have to be. Many ask why Hasidim wear only black gartels. And the answer is that in Yerushalayim, there are small groups of Hasidic Jews who on Shabbos wear white gartels. It does not have, the reason I wear black gartels because that's what my father wore, my grandfather wore, my great-grandfather wore, and I don't know why in Russia and in Poland they ended up with black gartels. But there is no, if someone wants to wear a blue gartel or a white gartel, as long as they're doing the separation, if you want to have when you get married, then if you want a white one, or a purple one, or a pink one, you're welcome to have one. But that's a good question. I appreciate it. Go ahead, Seth.
What the kittel on Yom Kippur,
No, Yom Kippur, everything's supposed to be white.
yeah, even the fat.
Some people have that. In Chabad, we wear a white kittel, but we wear my regular gartel. Ask me why, I don't know. Probably because my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather.
The white one.
Probably not. Probably not. Not. Any other questions?
Margot has something to say.
Oh, no, no.
Go, Margot, give it to us.
Okay, now you were talking about the linen. What about, was there cotton? They didn't use cotton at all?
Not
Cotton
in the prohibition, it's not listed.
would be the same situation,
So you can mix.
It will wool and cotton?
yeah? Instead of wool and linen?
I don't see why it would. It wouldn't be the same.
No?
No, I mean, wool is not coming. I mean, sorry, cotton is not from flax, is it?
No.
It's from cotton, huh?
It's vegetarian, it's not
It's vegetarian, you said?
cotton.
Yeah, what'd you say?
It grows, yeah.
Right, exactly. That's why, unfortunately, there were people that were forced to pick cotton. So I don't believe so.
So cotton and linen.
Unless someone has other information that I don't know about, I do not believe cotton. Whoops. If anyone here in the class has a different opinion about it, I don't think so. It has to be sheep's wool and linen.
A
So anyway,
linen,
it wouldn't even apply to like wool of camels and rabbits or goats. It's not considered Shatnez. It has to be wool from a,
cow,
yeah.
from a sheep.
Yep.
All right, well.
I do not believe cotton is part of that.
I'm
And if I'm telling you all the sin right now, then you should correct me.
I just don't understand why it is just flax seeds, the linen.
Because God said so. What do you mean why?
Okay, all right.
You don't like that, huh?
All right.
You wanted God to consult with you first, Margot. I know. Trust me,
Ask him about cotton.
there's a couple of mitzvahs, Margot, I wonder as well.